Hey guys, we are going over the War of the 18th centuries. This is kind of long because there's a lot going on with all the activity and warfare and alliances in Europe. So I actually need you guys to pull out this sheet. You guys kind of remember we talked about Austria and we compared the Habsburgs to France and Louis XIV, and we never got to finish Charles the Sixth, that right hand column. So I'm gonna go over that really quickly. Pull out. I think it's like red or pink in color. All right. So Charles the Sixth is the king of Austria. After he was able to conquer Hungary, what ends up happening is that he does not have an heir to the throne, at least a male one, and so he does not want to lose all the lands he has acquired during his reign, and so he issues the Pragmatic Sanction. And what's really important is that, and I'll go over this again, is that this document is kind of what the whole issue of the 18th century wars are all about. What the Pragmatic Sanction was is that it was an official document where it would ensure that whoever takes the throne after him, which he was preparing his daughter Maria Theresa to do so, it would not divide any of his properties. And so he required that every Diet and Habsburg Archduke to sign it, agreeing that these territories that is made up under his name in his kingdom are not divisible. This also ensures that Maria Theresa will take the throne after her father, and she is the only heir. And he ends up dying in 1740. The Austrian Habsburgs did not want to end their line of succession, just like the Spanish Habsburgs did with the War of Spanish Succession, which will lead to currently, what we're going to talk about today, the War of the Austrian Succession. Okay, so in order for this to actually pull through, Charles VI had to agree to costly economic concessions to England, Prussia, and Bavaria in order for them to accept it. And what ends up happening is that Frederick the Great seizes Silesia and does not really care about the Pragmatic Sanction, does not care about Maria Theresa's reign, and so this will kind of issue the whole start of war. Okay, Maria takes the throne at age 23, and she basically has to fight for her empire. She ends up having 16 children, and she's one of the most capable Habsburg rulers. And we'll get through this. So, a little bit of background. The two wars that we're talking about is the War of the Austrian Succession and also the 7 Years' War. There are some other names for it because of what was going on: the War of Pragmatic Sanction, the Silesian Wars, and King George's War, which is talking about Great Britain. The two wars were really won because the issue was still the same, and there are two main issues I want to go over that caused these wars. Though there was a time gap in between, really, it's the same people over the same territories. Okay, all right. So the two key issues. The first one really started with the War of Austrian Succession, and this is the rivalry between Prussia and Austria for territory, for military power, specifically in Central Europe. Okay, and then if we talk about the 7 Years' War, it's focused more upon Britain and France for the colonies, for rivaling in trade and sea power. But all these major players are connected together with alliances, which we'll talk about too. Okay, so a little bit more background that's important for us to understand in describing these wars. In the 18th century, the states really focused on their own interests, and diplomacy is for the purpose of building the dynasty. Whatever is best for the state. And so this concept of reason of the state is really their justification that each nation, each country is looking to its own long-term interests of their future of the state. Frederick the Great once said that in recognizing evolution of the state beyond personal monarchy, so how is the future of the country going to happen beyond that one person, he says, the fundamental rule of governments is the principle of extending their territories. Okay, so keep that in mind as he says a quote like this. You can imagine from his point of view of why all these wars are happening. Okay, and so there's a lot of international rivalry going on, balance of power. We just talked about that in two key issues, and it's what we talked about when you have a standing army, right? It's really not just for defensive, but also offensive purposes. You're trying to prevent the other side, your rival, from really dominating or growing more powerful than you are. Taxes supported these large armies, standing armies, basically ensured that if there are any types of political issues and disputes and conflicts that happen, well, through conflict we can see results. Okay, and so states fought over territory with economic and strategic value. Okay, they see this as valuable, and so this is not just happening in Europe, but also in profitable colonies overseas. And so from the time of 1715 to 1740, you will see there's a widespread peace, but starting at 1740, it's going to break loose. And so the 18th century wars were a series of wars, tactics, more wars, some treaties, rearrangement of alliances, that's really key, over essentially the same issues with the same powers, the same countries. Okay. All right, first war. So starts in 1740, lasts for 8 years. We talked about how Charles VI issues the pragmatic sanction, no male heir, and so Maria Theresa is going to be taking his spot when he dies. And so what ends up happening is that all these countries are going to turn against her, and specifically talking about Bavaria, Saxony, Spain, and France, really saw opportunities that, hey, you know, she's a woman, she probably doesn't know how to rule, probably vulnerable. Let's team up and do something about it, take some lands from the Austrian Habsburgs. The causes, two essential causes, okay, is that in the immediate cause of why the War of Austrian Succession happens is the seizure of Silesia. So Prussia is looking to seize this territory and fight for it. Austria is trying to defend and not give it up. And so that's the main immediate cause that really breaks it loose. But in the bigger picture, more significantly, is really just the balance of power in Europe. And that's why these alliances are established. Okay? All right, so there's two sides. On one side, right, on one alliance, you have, on Prussia's side, you have France, Spain, Bavaria, Saxony. Okay? And then on the other side, you have Austria with the Dutch United Provinces, Great Britain, Russia, and Savoy. Okay? So a few things is that you have a lot of different families involved in these two sides, right? You have the Hohenzollerns, you have the Habsburgs, the Bourbons, the Hanovers, and the Romanovs. And we're going to see that with these alliances, they'll change, okay? They'll change. And so it might be a little confusing, but it'll be okay, all right? So let's first talk about on the Prussian side. Well, you have Frederick the Great, right? He becomes king in 1740. And so he's 28 years old, a young buck, and he wastes no time. And he impulsively invades Silesia and unites basically Prussia and parts of Bohemia in the First Silesian War. So successful. And this shows that this was the first of a series of claims for Austrian lands by European powers. And from that point, many other countries are looking to do the same. This violated the pragmatic sanction, but Frederick the Great's justification was that, hey, this is the reason of state. We are looking for our best long-term interests. We are bringing forth expansion. Remember the quote I read to you. So he justifies it by attacking the Austrians first because others would have done the same. And so he asks this rhetorical question, when one has an advantage is to use it or not. Point proven. Okay. France, traditionally very anti-Habsburg. We talked about this in the 30 Years' War, that France eventually ends up helping the German princes fight, German states fight against the Habsburgs, even though France was Catholic and the Habsburgs were Catholic. But really, it's about knocking down the other powerful family. Its goal is to keep the Holy Roman Empire divided and eventually dominate Central Europe. That's their long-term goal. Reason of state. Why are they getting involved? Okay. This was a chance to retake Belgium, which we call now Austrian Netherlands. Okay, so I'll use those terms interchangeably because that's the territory we're talking about. They are temporarily successful, but they will not keep it at the end of the war. Okay, so they are having some campaign, some fighting that's going on in the Netherlands, but in fighting the British and the Dutch, they don't get to keep it. Okay, so the other allies on the Prussian side. So as we know that Spain is now part of the Bourbon family, that would mean that obviously they're going to be working on the French side, and they also wanted to reclaim some Habsburg lands in Italy. And so one thing I want to mention is that Italy is fragmented, just like the Holy Roman Empire is with the German states. So parts of Italy are owned by the Habsburgs. Bavaria, okay, was always and has always been a rival with Austria and never recognized the Pragmatic Sanction in the first place. And so they wanted some Habsburg territory, the Alps and Bohemia. So Bavaria is in it. Reason of state. And Elector Charles wanted to be emperor. So their leader wanted to take the position of Holy Roman Emperor and wanted to take those territories. Okay, so that's why Bavaria is involved. And lastly, we have Saxony and then the German princes. They generally supported the Russians and also France because France supported them against the Habsburgs in the 30 Years' War. So it's kind of like I scratch your back, you scratch mine. And so Saxony wanted Moravia, which is a territory in Czech, and the Habsburgs owned that as part of their empire. Okay, so you can see on the Prussian side, this is what everyone is involved in, right? Reasons of state. Here's a picture of the coronation of Emperor Charles VII in 1742. So the Bavarian king, Charles, who was the elector of Bavaria, he was able to take the throne as emperor. Okay, but later, after him, he will die, and then Francis I, who is the husband of Maria Theresa, will become Holy Roman Emperor. Okay, so Prussian side, Austrian side now. Okay, Austria is led by Maria Theresa. We talked about how after Charles VI dies, Pragmatic Sanction, she's in power. She's a devout Catholic. She will have a son, Justus II, which we'll get to, in line despot, and she is pretty much ganged up upon, and so she's looking for some support, and so she goes to Hungary and Bohemia, and eventually they are able to support her and provide 100,000 soldiers, which is a big chunk, and her other countries that she finds alliances with is the Dutch, and the Dutch, they are anti-French because if we kind of remember that Louis XIV and all of his wars, right, he had a desire to take the Spanish Netherlands, which are now the Austrian Netherlands in the Spanish Succession of War. The Dutch are now involved. Okay, so Great Britain, they've always been anti-French, rivalry and stuff. So the ruleovers were Hanoverian, the House of Hanover, and Hanover is this territory in Germany, and they had a fear of the growing Prussian dominance that they would take over Hanover. Okay, so that's one thing because the kings of England, of Great Britain, are from the House of Hanover in Germany. Okay, Maria Theresa and her husband in this picture, Francis I. Okay, so he will become emperor, but she will basically rule alongside with him, equal in power, if not more, in a lot of the decision making. Okay, so drama time. Okay, what ends up happening is a lot of those that were on the Prussian side are now switching over to the Austrian side. Okay, and the main reason why is really balance of power. They're looking to say, hey, you know what? We're looking for our best interests, reason of state, and we want to not make the other country too powerful. So Saxony switches sides along and joining Austria-Hungary, Great Britain. And then we see in 1745, with Charles dying, Bavaria supports Maria Theresa's husband as Holy Roman Emperor, and then they're going to be on the other side as well. Okay, so Russia is on the Austrian side. Their situation is kind of complicated because of where they are geographically. They have, for the most part, been anti-Prussian and anti-Austrian because of their rivalry in taking over that Baltic region, and so they have competing empires. So what ends up happening is we talked about two ladies. We talked about Anna and Elizabeth, and we talked about Anna very crude. Elizabeth comes after. Elizabeth is the daughter of Peter the Great. Anna, when she was in power, her court was pro-Austrian, and so that's kind of where they stuck with that trend. And Elizabeth, under her reign, she ends up to side with Austria because her foreign minister was anti-French, anti-Prussian, influenced her, and essentially Russia wasn't that big of a player throughout the War of Austrian Succession because they were tied up in holding off Sweden at this time, so it's kind of like a neutralization between the two. What ends up happening is Russia sends 30,000 troops against Prussia, and eventually there is going to be a peace treaty signed in 1748. Okay, and the treaty is called the 1748 Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. And this was really only a truce. It wasn't a true peace treaty where that it would carry on and really finalize and settle things. What ends up happening is that Austria lost Silesia and other lands in Italy. Maria Theresa, she will officially succeed and take the Austrian throne. She is recognized as their monarch, but the problem with what's going on in Austria is not only do they lose those lands that were really important, there's building and growing debts. The army is dwindling, and she was not be able to become Holy Roman Emperor because she was a woman. Therefore, her husband was able to take it instead. As far as a few more things about Austria is that Belgium, okay, we talked about Belgium, that will be returned to Austria. France does not get to keep that, and also Bohemia is now returned back to Austria from Prussia. Okay, but Prussia wins in keeping Silesia. That was the main issue. That's how it all started, right? And from this, right, they're able to grow their population, improve their army, right, grow their territory, and from this they became a great power. It was a huge loss to Austria, and this is where it doesn't end. It was just really a truce for a period of time because Maria Theresa is looking to fight and get it back. France was proven that it wasn't that strong because it was very split between its efforts militarily on land and on sea and couldn't hold to land gains. They had some successes and victories, but then they were not to pull through. And Spain was ending up to win some Italian Habsburg lands. Okay, so this is really important now. And we talked about how the drama with the alliances and switching sides, it really comes down to this next stage in these 18th century wars is the diplomatic revolution. Okay, so what's happening is that the alliances are now being flipped and reversed, and by 1748, we're seeing that because of the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, there are seeds of discord and things are breaking up. France had no real reason to trust Frederick the Great anymore because many times he deserted his French allies. And Great Britain, right, who was one-sided with Austria, did not want to support Maria Theresa anymore in reclaiming Silesia. They didn't think it was worth it. But at the same time, their worry is that they do not want to lose the territory of Hanover in Germany, and they wanted Austria to protect them from France and Prussia. Currently, the king in power is George II of Great Britain. And so what ends up happening is that kind of their needs are not being met, right? The expectations are not being met. And these weak alliances caused these powers, these nations, to look for new alliances. And so Maria Theresa's foreign minister, Count Kaunitz, believed that there should be an alliance between, his proposal, an alliance between Austria, France, and Russia. Okay, so now France is going to jump sides, right? But France, right, never really liked the Habsburgs, right, because of the rivalry for centuries now. Kaunitz basically encouraged French desires in saying that you help us take down Prussia, we will give you that coveted Austrian Netherlands. We will give you Belgium. Okay, so that's kind of something what they're into. And what they wanted to do was that they wanted to isolate Prussia with alliances. Austria's, this is their desire, is that you're trying to get France, you're trying to get Russia on your side, to single out Prussia. And so what ends up happening is that France is very reluctant because they felt like they've been enemies for hundreds of years now. And so the only way to ensure this is that we're going to see the arranged marriage of Marie Antoinette with Dauphine Louis, the 16th, sorry, 16th. So from this changing of alliances, okay, basically people switch sides, right? This is going to lead to the 7 Years' War. 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763. Is really a continuation of the War of Austrian Succession, right? We talk about the two wars really just being one. And Prussia and Austria still have their differences. And the thing is that Great Britain is going to be on the Prussian side. They will have an alliance now. So Britain switches to the other side with Prussia because they signed an alliance in defending to protect Hanover. And so they agreed to that. And so from that, France and Austria, they work together with Russia, and they're looking to say, let's take down Prussia together. Okay, so between France, Austria, and Russia, they all have pretty much 20 million people each in their countries, where the Hohenzollerns basically only have 6 million, and so they're greatly outnumbered, and they wanted to crush Prussia. And so the thing was that though they are small in number, Prussia has a better military, and they have a better leader. Frederick the Great, we talked about how he's a military genius, and he was very quick to act. He knew how to have surprise attacks and maneuver his army, and really he had no other military aid except for some financial aid from Great Britain. France is actually going through a terrible time in the 7 Years' War because Louis XV, who was in power at this time, saw it as a lose-lose situation, meaning that if Austria failed to get Silesia, France does not get anything out of it. Okay, it's kind of a gamble to join their side. If Austria was successful, then they would be ruling Central Europe, which they don't want. Okay. So essentially France is really in it to gain the the Austrian Netherlands, but it's a risk that they had to take. So what ends up happening is that this coalition between France, Austria, Russia begins to fall apart, and the French lacked enthusiasm. They had some initial victories, but what ends up happening is that Austria begins to lose trust in Russia and afraid that Russia would take over Austria. Basically, the team falls apart. Okay, Russia, at the death of Elizabeth, the next Tsar to take the throne is Peter III, who was pro-Prussian. And because he was pro-Prussian, but he was on the Austrian side, he pulls Russia out of the war, and so Prussia is now saved from defeat and drops Russia out of the war. Okay, so that's how it kind of ends on the European continent as far as Prussia's ability to defend itself, okay, and Russia's good graces. All right, so what's going on in America? The Colonial War, also known as the French and Indian War, because the French and the Indians were fighting against the British. International trade and colonial possessions grew enormously during the 18th century, which means that France and Britain and their tensions are growing, okay? Competition for land, as you can see in the map. Okay, the territories that France acquires, Spain is holding, and Great Britain, it looks like this on the East Coast so far. But that will change. That will change. Okay, the greatest conflict took place in America. And the two areas are the St. Lawrence River Valley and the Ohio River Valley. Okay, and so we'll show you a picture real quick. What ends up happening is that there are a lot of territorial changes. If you look at before 1763, this is before the end of the 7 Years' War. After 1763, after the 7 Years' War, you can see in that pinkish color, there are all these new lands that Britain gains, and so as you can tell, the British are successful. Okay, so the outcomes, they're all here. All right, the Treaty of Paris in 1763 is signed. What it says, the terms are that France will lose many colonial possessions, and they will lose Canada, parts of French Canada, to Great Britain, and so the British gain control of Quebec. Spain will give Florida to the British, and the West Indies, right, the Caribbean, the British will gain some control of some major sugar islands, and in India, where a lot of fighting took place as well, the British would gain control over French territory there. That was talking about the main rivalry conflict between France and Great Britain. Here we have the Peace of Hubertusburg, and this is between really Austria and Prussia. This happens 5 days after, and essentially Prussia was able to keep Silesia. Okay, so this whole thing with Maria Theresa trying to claim it back didn't work. What ends up happening towards the end? Okay, let's wrap this up. Britain becomes the most important colonial power because of all these wars. They are now mainly in control of North America. We have the 13 colonies and United States, all that stuff. Prussia established militarism as the framework of its future. It becomes a leading European power. Austria and Prussia rivals France, and Austria and Prussia remain rivals, and they'll continue on. France was unsuccessful, right? They're in debt, and they were not able to take Belgium because the Austrians did not win. Okay, and so the balance of power in Europe was preserved, right? There wasn't really essentially a huge takeover in land by one empire. And what we're seeing is that the diplomatic revolution really just caused more problems than solutions, okay? So begin with Austria, end with Austria. What's going on in Austria? The loss of Silesia was called by Maria Theresa as the rape of Silesia, and she says, you know what, we need to bring some reforms. Okay, we need to change our country because obviously we got beat down. All right, so weakness of army led to her to build a military academy to force conscription, which is like a forced draft, and to create a standing army of 100 to 300,000 men. Increased tax because of the constant war. This allowed her to increase central government, central powers of the government. And where is she going to take the powers from? She's going to take it from the nobles. She's going to improve education and secularize it, create primary and secondary schools. She's going to abolish tax exemption for the clergy, so now the clergy has to pay taxes, and yes, brings in economic reforms. Some humanitarian social reforms is that she would limit the power of the nobles and help the serfs in obtaining some justice, less forced labor, and giving them some property rights. Joseph II of Austria will eventually become king of Germany and Holy Roman Emperor, enlightened despot, and eventually will die in 1780. All right, so it's a lot, I know, 30 minutes, but we had to get through this. 18th century wars. Hope we learned a lot. Monday, please have your blue "What did I learn?" sheet from the salon. That's due. Also, finish reading that article, that primary source on Frederick the Great. Okay, and answer those 2 questions. All right, I'll see you guys.